It is 9 a.m., and I call this meeting to order. Casey Griffin on our staff will call the roll to ensure that we have a quorum. Casey?
Mr. Kraus. Here. Mr. Baucom. Here. Mr. Cobbins. Here. Mr. Darnell. Here. Mr. Eby. Here. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Ferguson.
Here.
Ms. Kim. Here. Ms. Tucker.
Here.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Here.
You have a quorum, Ms. Chairman.
Thank you. We have a quorum, and therefore we are duly convened. Without objection, Mike Edwards is excused from this meeting. I do want to welcome Nick Darnell, representing the 1st Congressional District, as our newest board member. And I also want to thank our student member, Hayden Baucom. This is his last official meeting with us, and we are so appreciative of his service with us. At this time, I'm happy to recognize each of you for any remarks you may want to make, although not necessary. No pressure.
Shockingly, here I am.
Yes, Wendy.
Okay, so I want to recognize a group that is here today. I'm not going to do a count, 14, there, God did it, individuals here who have spent the last 6 weeks here in Nashville in the Urban Leaders Fellowship. They have been working in the mornings with organizations here in the city in different areas to help improve the city, and in the afternoons they've been working on policy issues with me or for me, and so they have done incredible work. You won't be shocked that the 4 policy issues I asked them to work on are educator discipline, best practices in charter authorizing, principal pipelines, and parent empowerment and special ed, and they have done amazing work, and most of what I'm going to say about any of those things in the next several months is going to come from them. If they could just stand up and be recognized, that would be great. They're here from all over the country, and we have 2 Nashvillians, I think, in the group. The rest are here from all over the country, and several are choosing to stay in Nashville, I'm happy to say.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or remarks from board members before we get started? Yes, Daryl.
Just want to say welcome to Nick. Look forward to working with you. And to Hayden, it's been a pleasure over the past year to get to know you. I was actually bragging on you earlier this week at a local charter school conference. And there was a group of students from Memphis who formed an advocacy group to push for their voices to be heard. And one of the items that they're pushing for is a seat on the Shelby County School Board. And so I shared with them and encouraged them to keep pushing and used you as an example of how the voice of the student has helped illuminate a lot of the topics and issues that we discuss. So we wish you well. Thank you very much for your service.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Nick.
I just want to thank everyone on the board. You've always been very accepting. That was one thing I was talking the other day. I figured when I come in, being a high school kid in a room of adults, that there would be some kind of a differentiation there, but there never has been. You've let me speak just like anyone else, and my votes counted the same. And I just want to thank all of you for the help that you've given me, and it's been a pleasure to serve in this position.
Hayden, you made that so easy for all of us because immediately you stepped up. You were a board member just like all other board members. You were contributing every step along the way. So you made it easy for each of us. And we are going to miss you, absolutely. So you set the bar high. Any other comments? Before we get into the agenda, I have asked Sarah to provide an update, brief update, from yesterday's workshop session and our meeting with THEC.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick recap for those of you that were not with us yesterday. We had a full day on Thursday, beginning at 8:30 in the morning, with our workshop agenda. We looked back a bit about 2017-18 and some of the accomplishments of the board through our master plan, as well as sort of beginning to look forward into 18-19 and some of the work that we have ahead of us. We talked extensively about legislative session, and Nathan took us through a recap of some of the highlights from the 2018 legislative session, particularly those related to the state board and education issues across our state. We talked a lot about charter schools, both in terms of the state board's work as an authorizer, as well as the upcoming school authorizer fee that we've been working on collectively with a lot of stakeholders. And a number of other things, including course access program, which is going to be something coming back to the board in October as we think about how to extend online learning to students across our state. And then finally, at the end of our workshop, the commissioner gave the board an update on TN Ready, both in terms of the administration this last year, as well as the data that we've had back as a state in the past week. So it was a full morning. We broke for lunch and then met with THEC, the Higher Ed Commission, and had a joint meeting with them in the afternoon. Talked a lot about, not surprisingly, teacher preparation, one of our shared areas of focus, and heard from both the department, THEC, and the state board in terms of our collective work as agencies, and then also heard from Dr. Keith Carver, who's the chancellor at UT Martin, where Hayden's going to be going this fall, and how he's beginning to use the data at the campus level, both in terms of the report card and the annual reports. And then we also, as joint boards, looked at the importance of third grade reading and particularly highlighted that in the department's strategic plan and passed a joint resolution across both boards in support of that really important early literacy work. So it was a very full day, and we're excited to be here this morning as a board to work through our agenda, but wanted to make sure for those of you that were not with us that you had a little bit of a recap of yesterday's events.
Well, we have a very full agenda today. So before we get into the approval of the consent agenda, there are several things that we do want to pull. On items 6A, I, and K, we are pulling those for separate consideration. Without objection, we will do that. And item 3J, charter school annual authorizer fee, will be rolled to our special called meeting in August.
Madam Chair, may I just offer,
Yes.
I understand that's being pulled to look at some of the changes that I would make, that I had offered in the subcommittee and in first reading, and I just want to offer to meet with the department or whoever has concerns about this and offer the expertise I gained from my ULF fellows on best practices and try to get that where it needs to be in August.
Thank you. Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I'm supposed to announce those names. Bob provided the second, and Gordon the first. All those in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is approved. We're going to move into action items on first reading. These will all be a voice vote. Without objection, I would like to combine items 2A through D as consent agenda items and take one vote. Is there an objection? Yes, Bob.
I'd like to discuss the mission statement, 2A.
So we should take that one up separately and then combine B through D. Do we have an objection to making that change? Without objection, so ordered. Ms. Amy Owen.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. Great to see everybody again today. I'll start with item 2A, the board's mission statement policy. This policy was last revised in 2005 and sets forth the board's mission statement and vision. As part of our recent policy audit, where we were trying to identify rules and policies that had not been updated in some time, this one, of course, stood out, that it's been about 13 years, and our mission and vision have changed over time. What we also thought to do is the board is required by statute to create an annual master plan that is posted on our website. That master plan usually reflects more fully and in a more timely fashion the current mission statement and vision. So rather than having to update this policy every single time that the mission or vision is changed, we wanted to keep the policy slightly more generic, slightly broader, so that it refers to the master plan where folks could see a more detailed statement of the current mission and vision. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Bob.
Yes, and I understand when we had the questions, I asked about the vision and the mission, and I was told that it was in the master plan. I went to the master plan, and I clearly see the vision statement, but I don't see anything that talks about a mission statement.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, mission is the the core and the focus, and it's probably the various principles that we have in there of what we're, but it doesn't say anything, or I didn't see anything where it said, here's the mission statement. So I guess between first and second reading or something, I think we ought to correct that.
Absolutely. And we're happy to work on that either within this policy or perhaps edits to the master plan. We can continue to work with the members to figure out what's the most appropriate venue. Sarah, you look like you wanted to say something?
But no, I think that's right. I mean, again, as we're looking at the 1819 master plan, I think that's especially where we should hone in to make sure that it's clear, both mission and vision.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Hayden, do we have a second? Second. Wendy, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Now we'll move to B, C, and D together.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. These were 3 other policies that were also slated for update as part of our policy audit. So the changes are primarily technical in nature or to better align with statute. So I'll briefly describe each of the policies individually. The board member policy, we specifically needed to update to align with Public Chapter 539 of 2018, which changed the term of the chair and vice chair. And we also had some grammar and technical edits on that one. As on a quick note there, if it is approved on first reading, we'd like to consider this one along with the board meetings policy that Nathan James will talk about shortly on the special called meeting in August. That way, when we get to the October meeting that's in person, those things are firmly set down and the meeting can proceed according to those revised policies. The board personnel policy 1.300, the changes that we primarily made were in terms of terminology. It referred to the executive director and his staff, and we, of course, have Dr. Morrison as our executive director right now, so we refined it to be his or her, and some other small changes of that nature. And then item D, the standards review policy 3.209. We updated the sections a little bit better so it's clearer defined what the purpose is of standards review and then what the timing is. Those two things aren't mixed together. And we also wanted to be sure to address Public Chapter 697 of 2018 to identify that we do have recurring funds to conduct ELA math, science, and social studies reviews with a full-scale review process, including a standards recommendation committee in future years. So with that, I'm happy to take questions on any of those 3 items.
Bob?
Maybe I should have pulled this one out separately too, but when I read the responsibilities under the personnel, it states for all it has administrative responsibilities, says the executive director and his or her staff shall not be responsible for administering policies, rules, regulations, or the education laws of the state. Doesn't say what they do. I think we ought to change that and say that executive director should manage the staff and then not be, I mean, she's really working hard and get some benefit for what she's doing, but if you read the responsibilities, it looks like they have no responsibilities at all, and I think she has much greater responsibilities than that.
I agree with that, and we are happy to make that change between first and final reading.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mike?
Would say if, as a template, go look, we just made almost an identical revision at THEC to basically say the board empowers the executive director to lead and manage all staff action.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mike.
Awesome, thank you. Any other concerns
Any
about
other
those
comments?
3?
Do we have a motion to approve? Bob, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. You have the next item.
All
Thank you,
right,
Amy.
last one for me on first reading. On first reading, we have some clarifications to the English language arts standards that were implemented in classrooms this past school year in 2017-18. For folks who were here yesterday, we had a workshop presentation on the implementation check process that the board undertook over the past school year. As a brief background for those who were not able to attend yesterday, standards are typically reviewed on a 6-year cycle: ELA, math, science, social studies, and so forth, with elective content areas and CTE. In 2014, Governor Haslam and the General Assembly announced a mid-cycle review of the ELA and math standards as the state transitioned to Tennessee-specific academic standards. The review process was extremely strong, transparent, and rigorous. The only challenge really was the timeline. Because it occurred in the middle of this 6-year cycle, school districts did not have aligned instructional materials, and districts and teachers then had to try to implement standards changes in 2 major content areas in the same year. And that was a real burden on our districts that we don't want to repeat. So in order to get ELA and math back in line with their textbook adoption cycles and decoupled from each other, we conducted this implementation check of the ELA standards in 2018 and will complete one of the math standards in 2019. We had an online survey for the public to provide feedback. We got comments from educators, parents, and community members. And we also worked with the Department of Education's training and content teams that had been hearing questions from the field all along during this first year of implementation. We then worked with 8 Tennessee educators from K-12 and higher ed to make clarifications to the standards themselves and even more substantially to the glossary and to several appendices. So as we look at these standards changes on first reading, we want to be really clear that this is not a wholesale change that districts and teachers need to worry about doing a full extra training cycle for. These standards, if approved, would be implemented in the fall of 2020, and the state board will be able to put out a short, probably about a 2-page guidance document of exactly what the changes were, so that it's really clear to folks and people know, if they happen to need additional training, but that's pretty unlikely. So the public is encouraged to provide further feedback until September 15th that will be considered before the board hears these on final reading. We have a website, folks, or an email address folks can reach out to. It's tnstandards.review@tn.gov, and we'll certainly communicate that through our various listservs, newsletters, social media, and so forth. Finally, you're also looking at several revisions to the permanent elective courses for high school ELA, so journalism, creative writing, as well as the creation of 2 new courses, mythology and etymology, that districts often request special courses for. Those changes to the existing courses are primarily to their coding, formatting, and introductory text. So do we have any further questions about the ELA standards? I know we had several questions and some dialogue yesterday, but I'm happy to answer anything further.
Yes, we had a very lengthy and great discussion yesterday, and we do applaud the responsiveness of the department and you for working on this, because this is in response to what we're hearing from educators. So this is the right decision. Any other comments? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second? Bob, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Amy. Next up is Mr. Nathan James on the board meeting policy. And I want you all to please note that it's my intention to take the board meeting policy up on final reading at our August called meeting so that the policy can be in place for the October quarterly meeting. Nathan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Tennessee Code annotated specifies the composition and structure of the State Board of Education and gives authority to the board to create its own meeting policies. These policies act as the rules of order for the board when in session. This policy was revised back in January 2018 to modernize its operational practice. The current revisions are to continue to improve upon these meeting practices and are as follows. Page number 2 clarifies procedures for excusing board members, and this takes care of a legal requirement that we find in the law that mentions that if a member misses 2 meetings in a row without being excused by the board, that his or her seat becomes vacated. Page number 2 is in accordance with a recent legislative change that changes the term of the chair from 4 years to 2 years. Page number 3 clarifies procedures for disseminating materials for special called meetings, making it clear that the 10-day requirement, which we passed in January, does not necessarily apply for special called meetings, as they tend to come up at the last minute. Page number 4 adds a provision for electronic minutes for the workshop meetings. What it says effectively is that the electronic recording of the workshop will suffice as the minutes for that. And page number 6 is the meat of the change, and it adds a section for the workshop meetings proceedings. It clarifies that workshops are meetings of the board, but that the board is acting as a committee of the whole. I want to note that this was developed in consultation with Chairman Hartgrove and Mr. Eby. In his capacity, he was chairman of a local board of education. Also with Ms. Tucker, I want to thank you for the time that you took with me on this, with Mr. Cobbins, and also with Mr. Russell Humphrey, who serves as the chief clerk of the Tennessee Senate and is nationally renowned as a parliamentary expert. This was considered the best way to figure out, to add some formality to the workshop process so that there would be some structure of rules while not putting you all in the spot where your debates and discussion would be too locked up, so to speak. And with that, the staff recommends acceptance of this item on first reading.
Questions, comments? Wendy?
I think I have this right, but I just want to make sure that and I think we had this conversation. So that last section, workshops, all of the rules apply except what is delineated there. So for
Just to make it clear, you wouldn't have formal actions of the board taken. What would happen effectively is the chair, we would come in, we would say we were in session, the roll would be called, and then we would dissolve into the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole cannot take a formal action. It's less formal in terms of discussion as far as that goes, but the basic rules of the body which protect your prerogatives when in session would still be in place in terms of speakers and the board's ability to govern its surroundings and to protect the prerogatives of members. That's what would be in place. And that effectively is what we cover in 8B3. Voting when in the committee of the whole shall be limited to matters of procedure and privilege motions.
Okay. So my question was, I think there was a lot of ambiguity for workshops if we wanted, or if people wanted to speak. So this clears that up, and
Yes,
now it's the same 48-hour general rule as before. Okay, great.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Bob?
I know we have in our policy electronic participation, but as I understand it, that's if we're going to have a board meeting where everyone calls in. Do we have a policy, or do we include individuals who may be absent to be able to Skype in or FaceTime in, be recorded as present, and also be able to include discussions and vote? We did that on our local board.
So yes, the law is very clear, however, that if you have even one member who participates electronically, and they can do so by telephone or by Skype, depending on what we have available at the time, at that point in time, every vote of the board must be done by call of the roll. Also, the law is very specific, and this is not in Title 49, but this is in a different provision of the code, which deals with all boards and commissions of the state. That makes it clear that the person on the telephone can both hear all discussion and interject and be called on as if they were in the room. So it is certainly available. It's just the thing to remember is there is no way to do a voice vote on any matter in that case. But as far as a committee of the whole goes, you're talking about one vote in the course of a day. Unless someone was to make a privilege motion, like a motion to adjourn early or something like that, to if you wanted to stop the process early, that would, which is something you could do now anyway.
So both of those options are open if we needed it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, ma'am.
Item G, High School Policy 2.103, Elizabeth Five-Ash.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This item presents changes to the high school policy to incorporate changes that were made in legislation this past session around the incorporation of end-of-course exam scores into a student's final grade. And additionally, it clarifies the circumstances in which a director of schools may waive the third elective focus credit requirement if it would delay graduation for a student. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Hayden.
This is not a question. It's really more of a comment. Yesterday in the workshop, it was mentioned something about our wish list for legislation in the upcoming years. And this is a topic that I would suggest being put on the wish list because in that law that it refers to, that the way that the EOC exams are going to apply to the students, there's a range of no less than 15% and no more than 25% that's going to count for a student's grade. And I have a problem with that because if it's a state exam, it's a standardized exam, it should count the same for every kid in the state. If you've got Jimmy and John and they both have an 80 in English and they both make a 50 on the EOC, and that 50 counts 15% of one kid's grade and 25% of another kid's grade, how is that an equal system? You might as well not even make a standardized test if it's not going to count standard to every kid in the state. Now, I understand we use it for more things than that, but if you're going to use it for grading, it needs to be used uniform across the state on every student. And that's, I suggest that being put on our wish list for legislation, because I understand that we have no power to change that, but that is something that needs to be done differently, because that is a huge problem.
Commissioner McQueen?
Thank you, Hayden, for bringing that up. Two things I would add just for context. One, grading is set locally, so grading policies, how tests count for grades are set locally, and so we don't have a lot of authority as a state on how you set local grading policies, and it's also something we're not sure we want to get into because there's so much variance in how different local policies are set and what context they have when they set those. Second, and maybe more importantly, the actual law does allow for the TN Ready data or the state summative test data to not even be included if it's not actually received in 5 instructional days of that particular school calendar. And we know in our state, interestingly enough, if we really wanted to get comprehensive, we would set calendars that were the same, but we don't do that. That's also local politics, local policy. But we have districts that get out over a period of 4 weeks, meaning we have some districts that are getting out the beginning of May and some that are getting out the beginning of June, depending on when they start. And so it is complex. You do have some differences already just because contextually how boards set their local grading policy and then when schools actually get out. So when they can receive their data to be put into their grades can vary as well. So that's why it is a little bit more complicated than that, but we'd be happy to talk about it with the board if it's something we want to bring up.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Elizabeth? Do we have a motion to approve? Bob, do we have a second? Second. Nick, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Elizabeth, you're up next for the next item, I believe. Item H, minimum requirements for the approval of Public Schools Rule 0520-01-03.
Thank you. This item also presents changes based on legislation passed during the 2018 legislative session. The major changes that were made is updating the language on the use of stockpile days to include school-wide or system-wide instructional planning meetings, including the ability for LEAs to seek a class size waiver from the commissioner for CTE classes in grades 9 through 12, and including the requirement that all public high schools must have an automated external defibrillator placed within the school. Additionally, it mirrors the language that was just presented in the high school policy around clarifying circumstances that a director of schools may waive the third elective focus and updating the percentage that EOC scores must count as part of a student's final grade. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Bob.
I'm looking at the section on organization of schools. B1, it says, school systems which elect to extend the school day to at least 7 hours for the purpose of meetings, instructional time requirements missed due to dangerous or extreme weather, may allocate a portion of that extension for the purpose of faculty professional development, IEP meetings, school-wide planning meetings, et cetera. But it doesn't say, it says, I mean, if I read that, I could do all 7 hours for those IEP meetings, et cetera, meetings. Seems like to me you ought to have a maximum so that it doesn't impact the 180 days that the student has to attend or doesn't impact Am I making sense?
Yes, so there are limitations on, so there, you can only, districts can only earn or generate up to 13 stockpile days. And students still have to go the 180 instructional days. But if the stockpile days are not used on whether they could then use them for these instructional meetings if they submit a waiver request to the commissioner. So when that waiver request comes into our office, we do look to ensure that they're receiving the that all students are still getting the same instructional time and that they haven't surpassed those 13 stockpile days.
Would it make more sense, or would it be clearer if you said something that you could extend, the 7 hours, and you could use it for those times as long as it doesn't impact the 180 days or something like that?
We can make that more clear. That is in, if you look at B2, that it does, but I agree. I was reading over this again this morning, and it reads a little funny that it comes after. So
Right.
we can look at that and try to make that more clear.
Thank you.
Wendy?
Good morning. So I'm confused about how this would work with IEP team meetings. Is this saying that districts can pick a part of a day or a day and just say, we're going to do all our IEPs during that time? Or is this like individualized teachers who are out of the classroom for PD? I can't quite, I see how it works for weather. I see how it works for system-wide or school-wide instructional planning, but I don't see how this works with IEPs.
So, and I'm sorry that I don't fully follow your meaning. Is a IEP team meeting 7 hours? Or?
No, some are. Mine generally can be. No, that's not. No, what I'm saying is this is saying you can set aside time, right? In those, you're using these extra days over the 180, and you can use it for IEP team meetings. I'm trying to figure out how you're calculating how much time you're using for IEP meetings. It seems like the only way you do that is if it was like a school-wide block of time.
Okay, I think so it would be a school, actually it's district-wide. So the district would say we're going to use a stock, and they note it in their calendar on before the school year and they submit their calendars to us. So they will say, on October 5th, all of the schools in the district will be closed, that where the students aren't coming in, but the teachers are going to be coming in. We're going to be doing IEP team meetings that day, maybe some instructional, planning, so professional development. So it's the teachers are still coming in, but the students are not.
Okay, so for IEP team meetings, the students may be. I'm just not for class. So I
Correct.
guess my confusion on that, and maybe we need to talk just offline for final reading, if that is being planned on the front end with a calendar. I mean, federal law requires for IEP team meetings that they be individually scheduled with families, and there has to be like at a time mutually convenient for them, as in direct federal law. So if a district is saying we're going to have all of our IEP meetings on October 15th for this part of the day, that raises a red flag for me. So we just need, I think we need to figure that out. And I don't know if that's directly in the statute or what, but.
This language is directly in the statute, and that's definitely not the intent. The federal law would obviously always supersede it, but if we need to make that more clear, we can look at that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the flag. Certainly, this would not be the intent or the norm that a district would just say, I'm going to set this day aside. It could be used as such as the point if you were to have a family that needed to meet on that day for a variety of reasons. But the reality is this is not the norm, but we can clarify it in the language.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate that there would be a date that families could know ahead of time on the calendar, but you see my concern. Sure. If a family is getting intentionally or unintentionally a message that this is when your meeting is going to happen, you don't have any say about that, that causes some concern for me. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Bob, second. Hayden. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Elizabeth, you're up again for charter schools approved of a charter school rule 0520-14-01.01.
Thank you. This item updates the rule to make the adjustment that was again made during legislative session that provides local school boards with 60 days to review and act upon an amended charter application. That's the only change that is being made here. I'm happy to answer any questions.
No questions. So do we have a motion to approve? So moved. Gordon, do we have a second? Hayden, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Item J, Unsafe School Policy 4.202, Ms. Pat Connor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We are simply asking in this request that the language that is currently in the unsafe school choice policy that references No Child Left Behind be changed to ESSA in accordance with current federal legislation.
Wendy.
I'm going to ask what I ask every time this policy comes up, and we've had it a few times. Do we have, under this definition of an unsafe school in Tennessee, do we have any currently designated as unsafe schools?
No, we do not.
That's the answer I was hoping for.
Any comments or questions? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Wendy, do we have a second? Second. Nick? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Item K, Teacher and Administrator Evaluation Policy 5.201, Ms. Renee Diamond.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So our state board policy for teacher and leader evaluation has three major components in terms of edits to policy. The first is language around our student growth portfolio models. Part of that language is to ensure that teachers have district level support, so more clearly identifying the roles for district leads. Making sure that rosters, portfolio-related information and resources, and support is provided to these teachers. The second is to recommend the addition of a grade 2 student growth portfolio, which was piloted last year in districts across the state. The next component is to clarify the weightings for educator evaluation components next year in light of some of the challenges with state testing. And the final item is to submit our achievement measure list. From that list, teachers can determine what metric they want to use in their evaluation for the 15% proficiency level component. And those are the items that I have for review, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Questions or comments? Yes, Hayden.
I see in this, we had talked about this earlier, and you sent me a thing about the rubric concerns, and I just want to say that I'm glad that that was on there, because I've had multiple pre-K teachers from my district that have come to me, and one of them was actually, she's a teacher and she was also one of the peer evaluators, and she told me, and also another one of the preschool teachers were talking about the differences in rubrics between what the teacher had to make their portfolio on and what the peer reviewer had to grade it by. And they that was a huge concern, because how can you make a significant progress if you're looking at two different rubrics on both sides of the table? And so the fact that you had the rubric concerns here and talked about how you were going to change it and everything, I just really appreciate that. Keeps me from even having to make an issue of it, but I did want to comment that y'all did have that and put it on record that it's noted already.
Thank you. Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit too, Hayden. We took a survey of all of our portfolio teachers last year, and we had 2,700 teachers to respond with not only recommendations for next year and concerns, but also we got a lot of feedback on how they felt students had really grown more than they had expected in a lot of cases. We had teachers who said that students were writing in ways that they would have never predicted being able to do in the past. So, definitely some sobering thoughts, but also a lot of encouragement. And so we are certainly prepared to make sure that next year all of our support is really on the peer review process and on providing teachers with direct access to our team for support. In terms of some of the rubric comments, what we noted was that peer reviewers were struggling in the scoring process at times to even make a score where they were having to assign a 1. That's a difficult thing to do. Knowing that a teacher is going to have to, have a score that they may not particularly like. So we definitely sent more guidance to peer reviewers when we saw them struggle, really detailed step by step. This is what you need to look for so that you can do an adequate review. And so I appreciate your comment.
Do we have a motion to approve? Hayden, do we have a second? Bob, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Would all the speakers, when you come to present, would you please state your name and title? And Elizabeth, would you check the microphone because I'm not sure that it's turned on? Thank you. Licensure, restoration, this is item L, licensure, restoration applications, policy 5.500. Ms. Elizabeth Taylor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Taylor. I'm the General Counsel for the Tennessee State Board of Education. I am here to present the License Restoration Applications Policy, and this is the policy that governs our procedure when an educator whose license has been denied or revoked or suspended seeks to have their license restored. This is coming as part of our policy audit. The last time that this policy was revised was in 2015. So we're bringing changes to make this policy align with our license discipline procedure policy and rule, as well as the current practice within our office. So with that brief explanation, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wendy.
So I had this question on our call, and I reread it, and I'm still a little bit confused. And that's not you, that's me, Elizabeth. So when it's clear to me the process when the panel recommends not reinstating, I'm trying to make sure I'm using the right language, not restoring the license. What's not clear to me reading it is what happens when the panel recommends restoring the license. So when the panel recommends restoring, does it still come to the board, or does it get restored?
Our current practice is that it does not come to the board, but if that's something that you guys would like to see, we'd be happy to bring those recommendations as well.
I mean, I don't know. I wasn't even weighing in on that, and then, I always like to have my hands in everything, so I'm probably, but I think regardless, I feel like there needs to be a segment that says, if the panel recommends, this is what happens, and then we can have that conversation as a board of what that should be.
Absolutely.
I had the exact same question on the call. It wasn't clear to me what the process was, and I agree, we need to clarify it one way or the other.
Absolutely. We'll take to do that here, and I think probably also in our regular discipline policy, we'll probably have to clarify it there as well, so you can look forward to those changes in October.
You just needed some more work. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second? Bob, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Item M, Professional Assessments Policy 5.105. Mr. Michael Durline.
Good morning. My name is Michael Durline. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Educator Licensure and Preparation. The first item I have on first reading is the Professional Assessments Policy. There are a number of revisions to this policy, so I will go through each one and give a little bit of context for these changes. So the first is a revision to the EdTPA assessment requirements to introduce a gradual increase in the cut scores. This recommendation follows a significant research project conducted by the State Board staff, thank you, Spencer, where they found that EPPs implementing EdTPA early saw significant increases over time in performance, recognizing that successful implementation of EdTPA requires changes to EPP structures and systems. They also found that individuals who achieved a 37 on the EdTPA were not significantly different insofar as their performance compared to those who achieved a 42. We believe that this is a fair and rigorous approach for candidates and providers as they continue to learn the best strategies for implementing EdTPA. The next revision is to the school leader licensure assessment. ETS is regenerating this assessment. They conducted a standard setting study in January of 2018. We had 2 individuals from Tennessee on this panel, one from UTK and another from Shelby County Schools. The next recommendation is the adoption of the newly developed computer science assessment. ETS is replacing the existing assessment, which was originally developed for one state. We're confident this new assessment will meet our needs, and we had 2 individuals on the panel for that standard setting study, one from Tennessee Tech and another from UT Knoxville. The next recommendation is the addition of a footnote clarifying the required assessments for educators obtaining a license through the 912 pathway, which allows post-secondary educators to obtain a license. This is in response to a law passed by the General Assembly creating this pathway. The next recommendation is related to the elementary education assessment, which would be a shift from the current elementary education content knowledge assessment to the elementary education multiple subjects assessment. With subject test score or cut scores, this would ensure educators demonstrate content knowledge across subject areas. We believe that the reading and language arts components of the assessment were stronger than in the existing assessment. And it's important to note that educators may retake sections of this test if they pass some but not all. These recommendations come from an internal advisory group, a mix of folks from the Read to Be Ready team, the Office of Educator Licensure and Preparation, Standards and Assessment team, and State Board staff. Next recommendation is on the middle grades math assessment, where we will be recommending the National Evaluation Series assessment to replace the Praxis assessment, which would be phased out on August 31st, 2019. State Board staff convened a group made of middle school math educators and EPP faculty to review the math assessments. The Pearson assessment was better aligned to our standards and covered middle grades and early secondary areas such as Algebra 1 and geometry. And finally, a revision to the secondary math assessment, adding the National Evaluation Assessment Series as an option in addition to the Praxis assessment. State Board staff convened a group of folks again that looked at this assessment, and though both were rigorous, they thought the Pearson assessment was more closely aligned to the Tennessee standards. Given that math is an area of shortage in our state for many districts and to increase flexibility for out-of-state educators, we thought this would be an appropriate pathway. And this will also give us a good opportunity to research both assessments. I believe I missed one item on world languages. There are a number of areas where we do not have a Praxis assessment in world languages, so we're introducing the Tennessee Foreign Language Institute assessments, though I just found out they changed their name, so we will need to change that in the policy between first and second reading. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Wendy?
It's me again. So I want to talk about the EdTPA. Anytime we're lowering cut scores, it gets my attention, especially we had a lot of conversation yesterday and at every meeting about the importance of high-quality educators, and the most powerful factor is, right, a great teacher in every classroom. And so I'm curious, when you said there's not a significant difference from those who scored a 37 to those who scored a 42, what is that, like, quantitatively, what does that mean?
I'm happy to jump in too, and if we want Spencer to come up, he can talk more extensively. So we had a pretty lengthy discussion with the board subcommittee on teacher prep and licensure, where we looked through the data that Spencer had generated. I think the big thing that was sort of our takeaway was that for programs who are just implementing the EdTPA, that it's a very different kind of test, so they have to redesign their programs. And what we saw is that the cut scores dramatically sort of moved forward for candidates in those programs over the course of the first couple of years of implementation.
Right.
So in terms of the difference between the 37 and the 42, I'll let Spencer speak to that, because I'm not sure exactly which slide that's referencing.
I looked through the slides, but I couldn't.
And I'll look. I think I tried to bring those with me. Here they are.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, if there's not the reason I'm if there's not a significant difference in, like, the quality of the educator
Yeah, I
from a
think-
37 to a 42, then why?
I think there's more nuance there, but Spencer.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Sure. So what I can say is that from the population we were looking at, which we collected for the report card for the last 3 years, the teachers who scored between a 37 and a 41 had an average observation score of, I believe, 2.7, or TVAS score of 2.72, and those who scored above a 42 or higher had an average of 2.75. So we're looking at a 0.03 difference in average TVAS score between those who are in sort of the group that currently qualifies to teach and those that would qualify to teach if the policy goes into effect as it's scheduled to.
And was that disaggregated at all by, like, first-year teachers? I mean, I know EdTPA hasn't been happening for that's all first-year teachers. Okay. Do we have any data on teachers have we done EdTPA long enough to have second-year or third-year teachers?
So I didn't specifically look at second and third year teachers, but looking at all the teachers from that population. So
Okay.
that would be teachers starting in the 13-14 cohort of completers. It didn't change the results at all. We saw a pretty similar pattern. I think the difference might have been 0.04 instead of 0.03 or something like that, but it was substantively.
Were there any other differences other than the observation or the?
Observation was, I think, slightly, actually, I think, sorry, observation, I believe, was pretty much exactly the same for those two. And then we actually did see a difference in placement rates. So I don't think that we would go as far as saying that districts are looking at EdTPA scores, but I think we can at least say that they're correlated with the things that districts are looking at.
Okay.
So in general, we're seeing the people who score above a 4, like higher on the EdTPA, have higher observation scores. But looking at the total populations, there isn't much of a difference between this group that's scoring between 37 and 42 and those that are scoring 42 or higher.
Okay. And then my other question, which shows, I mean, I was here for some of the presentations on EdTPA, but it's been a while. They tend to do better after a couple years, and that's why we're phasing. I mean, is that a result of improved preparation, or could that be a result of the scorers scoring differently or more easily? Or, I mean, I don't know how that test is scored. I know there's some subjectivity to it, and that's why I'm asking that.
Yeah, so I believe at this point the 8 early implementers are all using official Pearson scorers for the EdTPA, and we're seeing across the board improvements. There weren't like suspicious improvements at any one EPP. But just as a note of what we think is important about these scores is that we've heard that they're really well, the rubrics used for the EdTPA are really well aligned with the team rubric. So our EPPs and the students that they've talked to have expressed that they felt very well prepared for that evaluation because of the process that they're going through with EdTPA.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other? Nick?
I have a question on the elementary ed certifications. I know in middle school, there's the middle school content, knowledge, and then you can break those into parts. And that's what has happened here, right, with elementary. The content knowledge test would not go away, right? That would, where you could get all 4 at one time, or would an elementary certification require you to take all 4?
An elementary certification would require that you take all 4. It would replace the content knowledge assessment. I think what you're referring to is the structure of our endorsements.
Right.
So for middle grades, we now have subject-specific endorsements as opposed to that general, at the time, I think it was 4.8 endorsement.
Okay. And so that, I guess the policy change is just to make sure that the teachers are certified and up to that standard in that specific subject instead of
And
taking
they would
the
have
broad.
to take all of these subjects, subtest areas. Does that clarify?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Michael-
So there would not be one test anymore. The content knowledge test would be gone.
Correct.
Okay.
Michael, this is minor, but on page 2 for the cut scores, world language, all of the others are moving up 2 points each year, but when you get to world language in the 3rd year, it's only 1 point differential. As I said, it's minor. Everything else is moving up 2 points. Do you see that
Yes,
in the
I
red
do.
light
That's a
version?
good point. So the reason why, just for some context, that the world language assessment cut score is different is because there are fewer rubrics. But I think that that's worth discussing if you think that we should be more rigorous in the second.
I mean, that is the
year.
national recommended cut for world languages, though, right, that we're getting to at 36?
Correct.
I'm not recommending that you change it. I just wanted to understand the difference. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If not, do we have a motion to approve this item? So moved. Bob, do we have a second? Darrell? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Michael, you're up for the next item. Item N, Learning Centered Leadership Policy 5.101.
Great. This one's a little more straightforward and short and sweet. This is a recommendation to repeal this policy, as items in this policy have either been combined with the educator preparation policy or included in the new Tennessee Instructional Leadership Standards policy. We believe that integrating these policies will help streamline the work related to educator preparation in Tennessee. Happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Any questions? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Gordon, do we have a second? Hayden? Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Next is item 0, Standards for School Administered Child Care Programs, Rule 0520-12-01. Miss Misty Moody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Misty Moody. I'm Director of School-Based Support Services in the Office of Early Learning. My office is responsible for all the monitoring for any school-administered child care. I'm here to present to you very few changes that we made to the most recent rules that you approved. We've received feedback from the general public, just for individuals who run schools and who are in classrooms, and we felt that there was a few items that needed to be changed and updated to make it easier to read. So I will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have regarding the items if you'd like.
Wendy.
You didn't have to wave that time. I just have why was it switched to 2.5-year-olds from 3 to 6?
Great question. We have a number of schools that operate off of the 3 to 6-year-old ratio, group sizes, and their pedagogy actually recommends that they use 2.5-year-olds. They allow mature 2.5-year-olds into that classroom, and so we have put this in rules that they would be allowed to do that.
Okay. And then the only other question I had, it's more of my curiosity. There's some really specific things here about like turtles and crock pots and hand sanitizer. Like where?
Right?
Yeah.
So
turtles.
I know. Well, they're a high salmonella risk. So our rules are, and the statute says that while they do not have to mirror the Department of Human Services rules, they do have to parallel. Okay. And so there's some items that the CDC and other individuals say that we need to make sure we keep away from children, and turtles are just one of them.
And crock pots.
And crock pots. Well, crock pots are used, so the reason why, sorry, I didn't mean to giggle, I apologize.
No,
Crock pots are used sometimes to warm bottles, and what we don't need are young children pulling them over on top of us. And so things like that have to be put in rules so that we can remind our adults who are in charge of our children to have them in a location where children cannot pull them over on themselves.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Wendy, do we have a second? Bob, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Item 2P, list of state-approved textbooks, Section D, Social Studies, World Languages, CTE Arts, Marketing, Finance, Business Management, and Administration. Ms. Lauren Bardwell.
Good morning. My name is Lauren Bardwell, and I am the Executive Director of Adolescent Literacy, Social Studies, and Instructional Materials. And I'm here this morning to present this preliminary list of instructional materials for Social Studies, CTE, and World Languages. I've asked my colleague Lacey Noel to accompany me today. She is the Director of Content, and she specifically supports the textbook adoption process, and she's here to assist me with any questions you might have. Based on some of the questions that we received yesterday about standards and textbook adoption and how those cycles align, I did want to give a brief overview. So for last July, the State Board approved the Social Studies standards, those new standards, and they are set for implementation in the 2019-20 school year. And we are in line with that in our textbook adoption cycle. We have, right now we're in the middle of the Social Studies adoption cycle, so the items will be approved and available for districts to purchase to coincide with the implementation of the new standards. They will have standards-aligned curriculum to complement their instruction. And as I said, we're in the middle of the Social Studies textbook adoption right now. Last September, our textbook commission approved the new science materials, and they also approved the screening instrument for Social Studies, World Language, and CTE. Over the course of the year, we put out an application for reviewers to review these materials, and they were selected based on their content expertise. And they reviewed these materials over the summer, and we are now presenting a list to the textbook commission of all of the materials reviewed. Now, the materials are reviewed against the instrument, and if a material does not meet the criteria on that instrument, then publishers have the opportunity to adjust their product based on the feedback. However, if they do not meet the criteria on the second time, then those products no longer will appear on the official state textbook adoption list. So again, what we are recommending that you approve the list of preliminary materials for the Cycle D adoption.
Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Bob.
A general question. What level of acceptance do you see in districts with regard to online or electronic textbooks, and is there definitely a movement toward that direction?
There's definitely a movement. I don't have exact numbers on how many districts are actually purchasing those materials, but Lacey, we have numbers about how many actual products were bid digitally.
Yeah, we have a total of 21 products that were solely digitally based, meaning there's not a hardback textbook for them.
Most materials, though, do have the text, the print, and the digital aspect, and all materials are actually available for public review. You can find them online, the digital version and the print versions housed at MTSU's James Walker Library.
Anyone else?
Again, just
Yes.
a general question. On average, how many textbooks that are submitted are denied?
We don't have a certain number necessarily because it's all based on the instrument. So we don't have a number that we're hoping is approved. At this point, we've had 57 withdraw from the process because their materials did not meet the criteria on the first time. Again, they have an opportunity to adjust, but these publishers decided not to adjust and they've officially withdrawn from the process.
I have 49.
Would you turn your microphone on? Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry. There's 49% of the titles that were submitted that passed the Section 1 review and 51% of titles that failed Section 1.
And Section 1s are non-negotiable section, so that's the cutoff for the first round of
And
review.
those would probably be textbooks that simply just don't align to our state.
Usually
There
it's-
may be a textbook that was written for multiple states and just doesn't.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And this is particularly relevant for social studies because Tennessee has very specific standards, and we've gone through a major revision in grade 5 with Tennessee history. So it's not surprising that we had a lower pass rate on that first time, as we have very specific standards in social studies.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve? Bob, do we have a second? Gordon, or was that Nick? Nick. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it.
Thank you.
Item Q, Data Review Policy 2.600. That's 2 zeros. Ms. Mary Badawala.
Good morning. Chapter 715 of the Public Acts of 2018 requires that the Department of Education develop and the State Board of Education adopt a policy that establishes a review period for LEAs to review and verify accountability data files and determinations before data files and determinations are released publicly by the department. This item proposes the creation of this said policy, which will be a new data review policy to meet the requirements of the law. Specifically, the policy proposes that each LEA receive no less than 10 business days to review and verify the following accountability data files and determinations prior to the public release of these data by the department. The included data are state assessment data, state English language proficiency assessment data, Tennessee Value Added Assessment Data, or TVAS, ACT and SAT data, chronic absenteeism data, and graduation data.
Bob.
I found this a little confusing.
Okay, I
Because
apologize.
You're talking about up front, and number one, you talk about no less than 10 days to review and verify before publicly releasing.
Mhm.
And then you go down, and in number 4, then you go through a review period and an appeal period, and then you send it to the district, and you send it to the district no more than 10 days, or no less than 10 days before publicly releasing it. And so I tried to draw a block of what that meant, and I couldn't make it happen. I think it would be much simpler just up front if you just said that no public release of the data until after the review period, the appeal period, and the district has 10 days. I think that would make things a lot simpler.
Okay, that's good feedback to hear. I think the confusion is coming because there are basically 2 stages. First, we provide districts all of the raw data that relates to those components that I mentioned. They have time to review each of those components in detail. Then we take all of that data, once it's finalized, with their appeals applied where necessary, and we pull it into an accountability determination, which would have, for example, been the A through F, which of course we're not doing this year. We then provide that data to them to review, so their actual determinations, and we provide them another 10 days to verify that we applied the business rules correctly. So currently the policy is written in a way that provides 2 distinct stages, but I hear what you're saying. Ultimately, what we're doing is providing folks at least 10 days.
Right, I mean, you're not going to release it until after they've gone through the process, the review and appeal, so that, I think if you take that first. And the other one is that you talk about, in one, you talk about business days, and another one, you talk about calendar days. And I didn't know if they should be the same or not.
Yes, it is. It's business days. Thank you for that feedback.
Isn't this already happening? It's not just not in a rule. I mean, I know the districts will say we got the information, it's embargoed. So just making sure that it's happening uniformly and with set guidelines.
Correct. We do have an internal policy that provides for this process. This just formalizes that process along with your all's approval. So
Then my other question is, under Tennessee law, the charter schools fall under the broader LEA, so the ASD or their district or the state board. And my understanding in past years prior to this rule is that some districts would get the data embargoed and would either fail to share it with the charter schools so that they could review the data, or would share it very late with them so that they didn't have a real opportunity to do what they needed to do. So I'm wondering if, I could probably pull up the statute, but I'm wondering if there is a way in this rule, or policy, sorry, in this policy to specify something about how charters would be able to get access to their data as well.
That's a really good point.
Good feedback. Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second? Daryl? Any additional discussion? All in favor, say, excuse me, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Item R, Education for Incarcerated Students, Rule 0520-01-12. Ms. Rachel Supay.
Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. My name is Rachel Supay. I am a staff attorney in the Office of General Counsel at the Tennessee Department of Education, as well as our director of the Office for Civil Rights. And I am here to propose an item regarding the education of incarcerated students. First, this item adds that the minimum length of the instructional day for incarcerated students is at least 4 hours. And second, this item makes clear that instruction has to be provided by teachers holding a valid Tennessee teaching license. And I am happy to take any questions.
Wendy.
First of all, thank you for bringing this. So we've seen this rule several times with several improvements for the education of kids who are in custody, so I really appreciate that as a former lawyer for those kids. So a couple questions.
Sure.
One is, what about the kids who are transferred to be tried as adults in the adult system? So generally those kids are housed, segregated in an adult facility, but they're still housed as juveniles. This doesn't look like it incorporates those kids, so I'm curious if there is a rule that covers those kids, if they're under the jurisdiction of the local sheriff or what that is, because my experience with those kids is they weren't getting any education.
Okay, this rule, you are correct, is limited to detention centers that are licensed by DCS.
Okay.
So it would not cover that other category.
Okay. Do you know where those kids' education is? And I can just dig it up probably.
I believe that would be governed by DCS rules, and,
Okay.
and I can certainly look that up for you and get back to you about that.
Thank you. The other question I have is on implementation and how you're going to make sure this is actually happening. And I know certain juvenile facilities that I have no doubt they're going to exceed the 4 hours, probably already are exceeding the 4 hours. They would have never thought about not having a licensed teacher. But I'm sure that there are others that this may pose a new challenge to them. Or how are we going to make sure it's happening?
That's exactly correct, and that's why we wanted to add this language to the rule, because like you said, many detention centers are already going above and beyond what this requires at a minimum. But there are certainly a few that are providing less than 4 hours and are using paraprofessionals or aides as a substitute for teachers. So we would like to add this language in order to help with enforcement. And we have a team of monitors that is going into these facilities to make sure that these requirements are being followed. We've recently hired additional juvenile justice consultants just for that purpose, just for enforcement. We provide technical assistance. We're trying to be creative in the number of ways that we are monitoring the situation.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon, any further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are going to take a brief 10-minute break, But I do want to ask the audience when you return, I don't think you all can hear us when we're trying to reconvene the session, so I ask that when you come back into the room at 10:25, that you please return to your seats. Thank you so much. We'll be back at 10:25. We will be reconvening in 1 minute. Please take your seats.
Seeing the agenda for the retreat. Are you working on that?
They're finalized. Yeah, they're finalizing. Please take your seats. We're moving into agenda item 3, action items on final reading. Items 3A and B are similar in topic, and without objection, I would like to combine them for one vote as a consent agenda. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. Dr. Lyle, Al-Shai for items A and B together. Would you please? Yeah. No.
There it is. Okay. Good morning. I'm Lyle Al-Shai, Deputy Commissioner of CCTE and Teachers and Leaders, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. As Ms. Hargrove stated, A and B are really related because A is basically approving the eligibility of the 3 courses before you, saying that they have been through the required 3-year pilot phase and been validated, and that they are now eligible to be placed in the course listing. And then B is actually taking action to place them in that course listing. Pre-calculus, statistics, and criminal justice statewide dual credit courses have gone through that process and are now ready to be added into that listing. Keep in mind, these courses have been developed by higher ed and high school teachers. They are aligned to post-secondary expectations. And once they are placed into the regular offerings of high school courses, they will be an additional option. And remember also that these dual credit courses are at no cost to students, and they're a significant piece of our ongoing effort to increase the early post-secondary opportunities that we're providing. And just as one final note, in case you're interested, during the 18-19 school year that we're about to enter, there will be 11 of those available to students, and there are 7 others currently under development.
Comments? Hayden?
Madam Chairman, these courses developed through here, do they apply to all post-secondary institutions?
All public state institutions.
They're transferable to all of them?
Right.
Okay, and who are those? They're taught through the state? They're not through any specific institution, are they?
Right, they're taught at the local high school.
Okay. And are they an online program, or just how does that teacher get qualified to teach this class?
Yes, there's a combination, but they would have to have the same certification as a regular classroom teacher, but yes, they are delivered online.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve item A and B? Darrell? Second? Hayden? Any further discussion? Yes.
I would just ask, and I know that the DOE team is on this, but we need to be very vigilant about the next year gauging the success. Our dual credit success rates are abysmal right now and are not leading students to gain credit, in fact. So That, by the way, I say higher ed bears a lot of responsibility on that because our faculty are the ones that the commissioner and her team are kind of having to work with to develop the assessments. But when we look at our spread of early post-secondary opportunities, this is the one that worries me the most because we sit students through a whole year of dual credit, have them take a high-stakes exam at the end, and then, you didn't get any credit. And for the student who is fragile in their belief about their ability to succeed in college, I worry that sends a bad signal. That is a higher, but I want to be clear, that is not on the commissioner and her team. That is on higher ed. But I hope we will reevaluate in the next year our truth in advertising to students about the dual credit pathway. I'm worried about it.
Yes, Mr. Kraus, I really appreciate those comments, and we have the same concerns. And Tandra Martin, who's the director of early post-secondary in our office, is currently reaching out to some of these teams that did this to take a look at that and to see if there's some adjustments that need to be made.
The other point to be made is the commissioner and her team, literally none of this existed 4 years ago. So the commissioner and her team have built this from the ground up. They've had to work with higher ed faculty who, as you know, at times can be difficult to work with. And they have corralled those teams to produce these assessments. So that yeoman's work needs to be applauded. I worry about our students and the messages they're taking from this.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any others? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. You have the next item. Item C, Employment Standards Rule 0520-01-02-03, and this will be a roll call vote.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. As described to you before, and I won't go through all the details this time that you received on first reading, but this is basically an effort to remove a duplicative effort on behalf of new administrators in CTE director positions. When this was implemented, I'm sure there were less structures in place to provide the professional development they need, and these safeguards were put into place to make sure that they received a certain amount of training and learning over a period of 3 years before they could actually move into the full leadership role. This now, because we have so many trainings, we have CTE Institute, we have other meetings, they are required to meet a certain amount of time in their study councils. They do a professional learning survey that the training by core consultants are tailored for them. That there is no need to continue to do this matrix because that same information is captured and the same learnings are occurring many other ways. So this is simply to streamline this process, and we ask for your approval of that.
Are there any comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve? So moved. Bob, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon? Any additional discussion? Casey Griffin on our staff will call the roll.
Mr. Baucom. Aye. Mr. Cobbins. Aye. Mr. Darnell. Aye. Mr. Eby. Aye. Mr. Gordon Ferguson.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Aye. Ms. Tucker. Aye. Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
The ayes have it, Mr. Chairman.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Item D, English as a Second Language, Program Policy 3.207, Ms. Jan Lanier.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm bringing back the final changes for our ESL policy. They're mostly vocabulary changes. As you can see, there were a couple of things that we needed to change to bring consistency. One was that we have new course codes, and so our recommendation for that to be English 3 and 4 was not valid because English 3 is no longer an assessed course, and the federal law requires that we assess these children at least once in their high school career. And the other change we made was just for clarification, we added the word full-time equivalent when we were talking about the teacher ratio.
Wendy.
Hello, how are you?
Hi,
Jan?
Wendy, I'm
You're
well.
used to me by now. I just have a pretty simple question, actually. I noticed that the biggest wording change was replacing must with shall, and particularly on the, like, what parents' rights are, and I'm just curious what that,
I thought that was the recommendation last time from this group. Yeah. So
is
I,
that, oh, was that Mike? Okay, okay.
so
I thought they meant
did it
kind of
on
the
your
same thing.
recommendation, but we can change it back.
No,
if you
no,
want.
no, it wasn't. I think it was just consistency. Okay, yeah, I couldn't figure out why that makes sense. I was asleep last time.
No problem.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve? Bob, do we have a second? I'm sorry. Hayden, I need a hearing aid. Wendy, you gave this second? Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Item E, Educator Preparation Rule 0520-02-04. Please state your name and
Hello
title.
again. Michael Derline, Executive Director of Educator Licensure and Preparation. The first item is the Educator Preparation Rule, an updated comprehensive revision to the Educator Preparation Rule to include key components of educator preparation, including the approval processes, outcomes and consequences, and partnerships with LEAs. Changes since the first reading include adding a requirement that EPPs provide candidates training on the Teacher Code of Ethics. This aligns with Chapter 937 of the Public Acts of 2018. Streamlining language related to clinical experience requirements. And then I wanted to call attention to two changes that were made between first and second reading that came out of comments made during the first reading. One is related to updates to the information related to annual reporting, clarifying which information needed to be submitted by providers versus that which needed to be verified by providers. And then second, changing the expectations for admission to an instructional leader preparation program. This shift is based on stakeholder feedback from the Executive Committee of the Superintendent Study Council as well as the Principal Study Council. And we also went back to the working group that we convened last summer. And there was a lot of discussion around the expectations, whether someone should have 1 year, 2 year, 3 years of experience prior to entering a leader prep program. Lots of debate there. So where we've landed is that we're recommending 2 years of experience and also adding a requirement that instructional leader preparation programs use a metric that demonstrates leadership potential, and we will provide guidance around what that can look like. But we thought that that was kind of a happy medium between the 1 year of experience versus the 3 years that was in policy and rule previously. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Questions or comments? Wendy?
So two things. The Teacher Code of Ethics, and we talked about that. I think you were here yesterday when we talked a lot about that. Is there a plan for implementation to make sure that EPPs are doing that, or some sort of oversight to make sure it has been happening?
Yeah, that would be likely part of our comprehensive review process, so we would build it into that entire system to ensure that it's happening. So every 7 years, we would review that with EPPs.
So, okay, and on the front end, because, 7 years in, you've got 7 years worth of teachers out there who may or may not have gotten good training on the Code of Ethics.
Right.
So I mentioned yesterday, is there any thought to the department either having some sort of uniform training on the Teacher Code of Ethics to make sure there's quality, or having some sort of rubric or measurement of what the training is on the front end?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that explicitly, but I think that's a really good idea.
Thank you. And then the other question I have is, there was a lot of debate, I know, around this 1, 2, or 3 years. And maybe I voted on this, I don't know, but changing it from 3 years to 1 year, when did that occur?
So we're actually changing it to 2.
You're changing it to 2 now, but it's currently
Yes.
1, right? Or it's currently 3?
It's currently 3.
Okay, so it
And
was
then
proposed as 1 in the first reading.
Correct.
And then it moved up to 2.
Yes.
So you have to be a teacher for 2 years before you can move on and be a principal, is basically what this says.
Well, you have to be a teacher for at least 2 years to be admitted to a principal prep program. You have to have at least 3 years of experience to get the license. So most folks, if they're going through a program that is, say, 2 years, would actually have 4 or 5 years of experience. when they get the license.
And the reason to reduce this from 3 at all?
There was a lot of conversation around this. I
With,
think
I'm
that-
sorry, who was having that?
I brought it up at the last meeting.
Yeah, no,
I was
I know we
concerned-
talked
yeah,
about it
right.
at the last meeting, but I'm talking
was
about
talking
like,
about
this
internally.
came initially to like a proposal of 1 year.
It
So
did.
Correct.
where'd that come from?
That came from a lot of discussion with educator preparation providers who said that they're using other metrics to determine that someone has leadership potential. And we also had some folks say that it ran the gamut. And when we went back between first and second reading to get feedback, we had folks arguing in both directions. So we believe that 2 years of experience, but also requiring a specific metric around leadership potential was fair. So in folks that have been serving as teachers in Tennessee, that metric could be something like performance on the team professionalism rubric, which looks at certain characteristics like leadership and use of data and things like that.
So my concern is I have seen situations where teachers are pulled out of the classroom, put in positions of leadership way before. And, you know, what it takes to make a great teacher does not necessarily equal what it takes to make a great school leader. So I appreciate these rubrics and all this other stuff, but I don't know there's any substitute for spending a substantial amount of time in the classroom. So I personally, I mean, I had big concerns about 1 year. I have equal, not much lesser concerns about 2 years, just for my purposes.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Yeah,
Commissioner.
I have had so much experience with this on the ground, and I will tell you, there's probably not a right answer to it. Between 1 and 3, there can be lots of nuance in if someone is prepared or not. I will tell you from specifically working with a group like the Teach for America core members, there were many of them that they were at the end of their 2-year commitment, and they wanted to go ahead and start a leadership program, and that was going to keep them in the classroom. And it was also going to help them pursue a leadership opportunity, and so it felt like it was appropriate. And so the 3-year was somewhat of a barrier to particular groups of students. That one stands out as one that I know they have a very specific commitment, and so as you move to the 3rd year, you may or may not keep them in the field of education because they want to pursue a degree, but they have to take another year of time in the classroom before they can even apply to the leadership program and get accepted. So there's been a lot of back and forth on this issue. I think more experience as well is necessary for people to really make that call. 2 seemed like a very good place to be, just based on different conversations we had with our educator prep programs.
I would add, too, that I think we are going to have leader prep programs that still require 3 or 4 even, and they're entitled to do that. So this does provide us with a good opportunity to research if there are any differences in performance for providers that do have the greater expectation for experience.
And the leadership programs will now be on the report card, right? Okay. I mean, okay, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I would love to hear Ms. Kim's thoughts, if she would share them on this. How many years in the classroom before you entered a leadership program? Just because I know she's done a lot of recruiting for TFA and for educators generally.
Your microphone. I don't think it's turned on.
Any opportunity that allows strong talent to get into a leadership pipeline as quickly as possible, I'm biased towards, without locking us on the other end. Meaning, like, as long as there are opportunities to, it shouldn't be just anyone, but if there's a selective process and there's great talent, we should have means for them to get slid in, because otherwise they're going to go off to McKinsey or to Bain or something else, and we don't want to lose those people.
Thank you.
Another comment I would like to add, at some point in the very near future, I think it may make sense to put leader prep in its own section of this rule, just to draw attention to how important it is to all of us, to make sure that we're highlighting and putting all the proper sections and policies into place under that one rule, if that makes sense. Yes, Bob.
Just a question for information. Under clinical practices, it says that practice sites can be public schools or category 1 and 2, 1, 2, or 3 non-public schools, and not 4 and 5 Where are those categories defined, and what are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5?
I believe there's a separate rule if
So one of our team members can speak to that. There are, different provisions that speak to the categories of schools that this refers to.
That's a great question, Bob. Thank you. We do have a non-public school rule that defines what those 5 categories are. And the different categories of school have to meet different requirements. Some are just, they're recognized by the state for operation, and they might meet very basic requirements like meeting the fire code. Some of them are more, they're kind of vetted by the state, or they have some sort of external accreditation process from a regional agency. So that's the difference between those categories.
Any other comments? Wendy?
I would just, I know this is on final read and I get in trouble for this all the time, but I mean, that was a point well taken. Is there a way to just add a clause that says as defined in?
Yeah, I think that would be good, too.
Just so that anybody who's reading this and doesn't know what those are can go see what those are.
Will you move to amend?
I would move to amend, but I don't know what that rule number is. So can I move to amend it and leave a blank?
It's 0520-02-04-10, number 7.
But then I think we need to add in the rule reference.
Yeah.
Right, the
category.
reference
So-
for the categories.
Okay.
That's the one I don't have a number for.
We can get that reference and add it
Okay.
in. We'll just make sure it's accurate for the final.
Are you ready for a motion, Madam Chair?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
I would move to amend 0520-02-04-10 clinical experiences subsection 7 to add I guess I would add after the placement sites period, these categories are defined in State Board Rule blank, and we'll fill in the blank, period, and then go on to if extraordinary.
Do we have, excuse me, do we have a second? All in favor? That was Bob. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The amendment has been approved. Now we need a motion to approve the educator preparation rule as amended. Do I have a motion? Bob, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon, this is a roll call vote. Casey, please call the roll.
Mr. Balkum? Aye. Mr. Cobbins? Aye. Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby? Aye. Mr. Edwards? Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Ms. Kim? Ms. Tucker?
Aye.
Ms. Hargrove?
Aye.
The ayes have it, Mr. Chairman.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Item, excuse me, item F, educator preparation policy 5.504. Michael?
Thank you. The primary recommendations here include updates to the policy to integrate expectations for the preparation of instructional leaders, including annual reporting metrics. This creates a single streamlined educator preparation policy. Changes since first reading include, again, the language regarding admission to an instructional leader preparation program, and also shifts in terminology from content area to discipline specific throughout the literacy standards to better align with expectations for literacy preparation. Be happy to take any questions you may have.
Wendy?
I don't have any questions. I just want to comment. Some of the folks who worked on this with the Urban Leaders Fellowship worked on the principal pipeline issue, had some really great ideas and did some research on incentives for great school leaders, and also on helping to support school leaders who are already in place to improve, particularly in rural areas. So at some point, I would love to have conversations with the department about some of the great work that they did and see where it could fit in rule or policy or just in practice.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second? Hayden, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Michael. And And you're up next for H, educator preparation providers and specialty area program approvals. This is on first and final vote.
Great. These action recommendations include 3 educator preparation providers, Lee, UT Martin, and TFA Memphis, 2 engaged in a joint review process with CAPE, 1, TFA Memphis, engaged in a state-only process. All EPPs were found to have minor stipulations that they must address, nothing critical or major. As a result, all EPPs are being recommended for full approval with minor stipulations. Just a reminder, as you're looking through the document that was submitted for each, CAPE's terminology, AFI, or areas for improvement, is equivalent to our minor stipulations, whereas their terminology stipulation is equivalent to ours major stipulation. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
I think I skipped it. We'll come back to it. Bob has a comment?
Just a comment. I met with Dean of Education at Lee University this week and was very impressed with him, and they're very much engaged in this program.
Yes.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Hayden and Bob, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Congratulations to these 3 institutions, Lee University, UT Martin, and Teach for America Memphis. And it was brought to my attention that I skipped an item. There's a lot of items here.
I was going to
We need
say,
to
I
go-
hope you all like me as much as you liked Amy, because you might be seeing a lot of me.
We do.
Good.
Item F, educator preparation policy. I think, no, we're on G.
Licensure,
G,
yeah.
G, sorry. Educator license policy 5.502.
Thank you.
Michael?
Primary recommendations include flexibility of waiving out of assessments for educators from other states who meet specific performance criteria, and adjustments to PDP activities. Changes since first reading include multiple clarifying items related to testing and program completion timelines, as well as requirements for reactivating a license and a shift in the language from teacher to educator licensure for supervisors of attendance. I'd be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
No questions, no comments. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Gordon, do we have a second? Hayden, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. I think you're finished, Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I believe we're on item I. Somebody correct me if we're wrong. K8, computer science standards. Ms. Virginia Mayfield.
Good morning. My name is Virginia Mayfield. I'm the Executive Director for the Office of Science, Math, and Student Opportunities. I am presenting to you today the Tennessee K8 Computer Science Standards for final reading. These standards lay a foundation to enable students to be workforce and post-secondary ready in our continuously evolving technological world. Since first reading, there's been some minor wording clarification, and examples of connections to the Tennessee academic standards have been added, really in order to help provide guidance on how to integrate these standards, showing that digital readiness is not an isolated event, but really truly part of an integrated system of learning for kids. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
No questions, no comments. Okay. I need a motion to approve. Bob, second. We need a second. Hayden, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Thank you for your great work. Okay, we're moving on to item L, School Attendance Policy 4.100. Ms. Christy Ballard. Did I skip again? Ah. Okay, item K, sorry about that. Tennessee Instructional Leadership Standards Policy 5.106.
Yeah, good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Paul Fleming, Assistant Commissioner for Teachers and Leaders Division. This item does two things on final reading with no changes. One is to make this a standalone board policy, separate from where it was embedded before in the learning leadership policy. And second, to provide some updates aligned to Tennessee Succeeds and also to the National Professionals Leadership Standards to upgrade those. And I will just add quickly to the previous item that Wendy was mentioning about the 2-year requirement. I think this is another opportunity for leader preparation programs then to embed these standards as they have, to strengthen programs and provide another opportunity in that continuum for aspiring leaders to grow and develop, and also like a safeguard or checkpoint as well. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions, comments? I need a motion to approve. Nick? Daryl? I need a hearing aid and new glasses, too. Do we have a second? Hayden? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, item L, School Attendance Policy 4.100. Ms. Christie, no, that's Elizabeth Five-Ash.
Thank you, Madam
ahead.
Chair. Yes, I am filling in for Christy Ballard today, Elizabeth Five-Ash, Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Legislation. The school attendance policy was updated on first read to include a provision that addresses student participation in college campus visits. Since first reading, we changed the grade span for which this policy is applicable to all high school students, grade 9 through 12, at the recommendation of the board. And with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
There are no questions. I need a motion to approve. Hayden, do we have a second? Bob, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Are you up for the, you are. Item M, District and School Improvement Planning Policy 2.101. Ms. Elizabeth Five-Ash.
Thank you. This policy sets out the requirements for LEAs in developing their 5-year strategic plan and their, in addition to their long-term LEA improvement plan. There have not been any changes since first reading.
Any comments? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Gordon, do I have a second? Nick, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you,
Madam
Elizabeth. The next item is N, Homebound Instruction for Pregnant Students, Rule 0520-01-02.10. Ms. Elizabeth Taylor, this will be a roll call vote.
Good morning again. Elizabeth Taylor, General Counsel for the Tennessee State Board of Education. I am presenting homebound instruction for pregnant students, Rule 0520-01-02-.10. Last board meeting, we present changes to open up this rule to all students who can't attend school because of a medical illness or mental illness that keeps them from attending the regular school day. This last General Assembly legislation was passed that removed the for pregnant students caveat in the law that would allow us to open up our rule for any general education student who can't attend school because of illness. Since first reading, there were only a couple changes. The first one is to clarify that the 504 team, if applicable, should be included in the homebound review team, and then to clarify that the instructor that's sent out for homebound instruction should be a teacher licensed in accordance with law. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I need a motion to approve. Bob, do we have a second? Nick, any discussion? This is a roll call vote. Casey, please call the roll.
Mr. Baucom. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker. Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
Yeah,
The ayes have it.
the ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Without objection, we will combine items O through X as a consent agenda and take one voice vote for all. Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered. Ms. Testoval.
Good morning, Tess Stovall, Director of Charter Schools with the State Board of Education. The following 6,000 series of the State Board policies are up for final reading. We evaluated these policies both as a part of our policy audit schedule of review and as well as the fact that we've been an authorizer now for a year, and so we wanted to align them to our current practice. On final reading, there are two policies that have had relatively minor changes. We've clarified the timeline in both the revocation policy and the renewal policy, in which a school would have to submit a notice of appeal to the state board, and this is to ensure alignment with our charter school appeals policy. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions or comments? Do I have a motion to approve? Wendy, do we have a second? Hayden, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Item Y, State Board of Education Charter School Local Education Agency Policy Revisions. Ms. Angie Sanders.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members. I'm Angie Sanders. I'm the Deputy Director of Policy and Accountability for the State Board. I'm presenting to you on final reading revisions to a handful of State Board LEA policies to incorporate changes that were made to state laws this year, as well as a new policy on homebound instruction to incorporate changes to the new rule that Ms. Elizabeth Taylor just presented, as well as the state law that was passed on that subject. These policies, again, apply only to our authorized charter schools, and they were given the chance to provide feedback on this before bringing it before you. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Wendy, do we have a second? Hayden? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. And you're up for item Z, Uniform Grading Policy 3.301. Ms. Amy Owens.
Hello again, Madam Chair and members. I'm Amy Owen, Director of Policy and Research for the State Board of Education. I'm here with the Uniform Grading Policy on final reading. There has been one change since you heard it on first reading in April, to align with a change in state law that occurred in the most recent legislative session, Public Chapter 920. In that public chapter, there is a specific change to the requirements for a local grading system. Now, as you know, every school district is required to comply with the state uniform grading system so that all students have a chance to have scholarship eligibility calculated on an equal playing field. School districts may also have, if they so choose, a local grading system for purposes like valedictorian. The state law is actually very specific about what can be in the local grading system, which might seem a little incongruous because it is a local decision to have it, but we do need to align with that legislation. So with the legislation change, we changed our requirements in the policy for the local grading system.
Are there any questions or comments? Do we have a motion to approve? Nick, do we have a second? Bob, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. Item AA, the 2018-19 State Board of Education Master Plan. Ms.
Great.
Amy Owen.
Thank you. I'm so excited to present this item. The State Board is required by law to develop and maintain a current master plan for the development of public education, grades kindergarten through 12. This year, the state board moved from operating on a calendar year master plan to an academic year master plan. And we're excited about that because we think it'll allow us to track programs and achievements and outcomes over the school year, which is how we look at everything else in education. So Spencer presented yesterday on some of the accomplishments from 2017 and the first half of 2018. And I'm here today to share on first and final reading our proposal for the 2018-19 master plan. This was made with extensive involvement from the board. As Spencer mentioned yesterday, you all received a survey in April, and I appreciate your time in completing it and sharing your policy priorities for the year. And you also had a chance to provide feedback on a first draft. Now, of course, setting the master plan today really means that the work begins on Monday to establish work plans for each of these items, and we look forward to being involved with our specific subcommittees as well as individual members to set work plans for each of these areas. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I look forward to working with you throughout the year on this plan.
Any comments? Thank you, Amy. Great work. I need a motion to approve. Bob, second?
Second.
Gordon? Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Amy. Item BB, standard setting for social studies. Ms. Mary Badawala.
Hello again. I'm Mary Badawala, Assistant Commissioner from the department, and I'm here today to present for your approval the social studies standards for our new social studies T and Ready assessment. As you know, the Department of Education administered a new social studies T and Ready assessment this year, which is part of our larger TCAP program for grades 3 through 8. In order to complete the reporting of test scores for our students, teachers, and districts, it is necessary for the State Board of Education to adopt cut scores that will be used to assign student performance levels on this social studies TCAP assessment. The cut scores recommended today by the department are based on the recommendation of educator panels who participated in a standard setting process last week. Standard setting is a qualitative review of content standards with panels of educators who are content experts. Each panel completes 3 rounds of ratings and a process of vertical articulation to ensure alignment, consistency, and reasonableness across grades. During the week of July 16, 2018, panels of Tennessee educators, as well as other stakeholders such as parents, convened in Nashville to recommend cut scores for grades 3 through 8 social studies TCAP assessments. You have in front of you our proposed recommendations based on the panel recommendations last week for your approval.
Any questions or comments? Nick.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Social studies, of course, is very dear to me, being a social studies teacher. First question I have, these scores will determine achievement, correct? And this year there will be no growth scores.
There actually, we are able to calculate our TVOS metric for grades 5 through 8. So we communicated at the start of last year as we were preparing to make this transition to our field that we were going to be able to calculate TVOS for grades 5 through 8 using a particular model that our growth calculation employs. So we will have growth scores for grades 5 through 8, and you are correct that what you are approving today would determine the actual performance, so the percent of students scoring on track.
Okay. And I know that this upcoming school year, there will be no social studies assessments for elementary. Is that correct, or grades?
That's correct.
Okay. And I know at present, social studies is not counted in the school-wide data currently because we've had the changes. When do we see that happening? When do we see social studies coming back into the calculation for the entire school and district?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do report, of course, on social studies data. We will be reporting on these data from this past school year. However, you are correct that social studies is not included in school and district accountability calculations. As you know, we'll actually be implementing new standards in 1920 for social studies. So our anticipation is that we would work to incorporate social studies into the accountability determinations after 1920, once we've reset the standards and our teachers have had the opportunity to transition to those. And we've made a final decision on how to proceed with grades 3 through 5, because of course this is just a pause this year, it's not an elimination.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions? Do we have a motion to approve? Nick, do we have a second? Hayden, any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 4, DHS licensure actions. Item A, Tennessee Department of Human Services defaults, Ms. Brittany Kendrick.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Again, I'm Brittany Kendrick, the staff attorney for the State Board of Education. Up before you are the child support obligations that we received from DHS that they have defaulted on, similar to how you all have ruled on or dealt with TSAC violations in the past. This is very similar to that. There will need to be a roll call vote. You can take them per board meeting policy as a whole, but these are the ones that we received from DHS that these individuals had defaulted on their child support obligations, and pursuant to law, their licenses are supposed to be suspended until they come into compliance.
Is your microphone on?
I'm sorry. It is. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, I
thank you.
apologize.
Wendy?
Good morning, Brittany.
Yes.
So yesterday, Nathan mentioned a new public chapter that will, I believe, I just pulled it up, his presentation, go into effect January of 2019, that would allow medical hardship to be an exception.
That's in regards to student loans. These are child support, court order child support obligations.
Okay. All right. So these we are required by law.
Right.
The only requirement is that you're notifying us. We don't have any choice how to vote
So
on these.
when we recently amended our rule, we aligned child support obligations with TSAC so that we would give them an additional notice in addition to what DHS does. And so they received notice from us, and then they were put on the agenda today as well.
Was there any conversation about, well, I guess medical hardship or child support isn't a good enough excuse. Never mind.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you.
So it would need to be a roll call vote to approve for suspension of their licenses today, I believe.
Okay. We'll call on Casey to take the roll.
Mr. Baucom. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker. Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 5, teacher revocation appeals. Item A, Michael Young. Ms. Elizabeth Taylor.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Again, my name is Elizabeth Taylor, General Counsel for the State Board of Education. This item is an appeal of a denial of licensure of Mr. Michael Young. The State Board staff recommended denial of Mr. Young's license, and Mr. Young requested a hearing to contest that recommendation. After a hearing before an administrative law judge sitting on behalf of the board, the administrative law judge entered an initial order denying Mr. Young's license, and Mr. Young has appealed that denial. On appeal, the board is required to hear his appeal and render a final order after the ALJ's initial order. In doing so, the board may take one of 3 actions. The first action available is to adopt the initial order of the ALJ in part or in whole as the board's final order. The board may, number 2, enter a new final order with findings of facts, conclusions of law, and the policy reasons for the order. Or number 3, the board may remand the matter back to the administrative law judge with specific instructions for further proceedings. Here today, there'll be no oral argument, and the board is to consider the appeal based on the technical record that it was provided, as well as Mr. Young's brief and correspondence in making its decision. The Staff Review Committee's recommendation is to adopt the administrative law judge's initial order as its final order. And with that, we will open up to the board for its determination.
Any discussion? Wendy?
Sure. So just to set context for those who may be listening and haven't reviewed this, I read the transcript, read all the materials, as I'm sure everybody here did, and Mr. Young pled guilty to a felony, a number of felonies in federal court for bribery, it was extortion, that sort of stuff, for basically with a bar in Memphis, and he was a police officer, right? I mean, just so we can set the context. And I wanted to sort of clarify one thing that he had in the record as not true. He said in the record, he's not a lawyer, he represented himself, so I'm not saying he intentionally misled, but he said in the record that as felonies, these are non-violent, non-threatening felonies, and that's not actually the truth. These specific felonies, felony is the lowest level of felony under Tennessee law, but it doesn't mean that it's not threatening and non-violent. So I just wanted to clarify that because he said that in his documents. And then the only other thing I want to say, everybody on this board, well, most of this board has heard before. I spent over a decade doing criminal defense work. I get the rehabilitation. My heart goes out to people who make really bad decisions and have to live with it in the future. And I want this gentleman to have a job and be able to prosper. However, it is very different than having the privilege of being a teacher in a classroom in the state of Tennessee. And I feel very strongly that the profession is the most important we have, and that until we treat it that way by limiting who can do it, it won't be given the respect it deserves. And so one of the things the judge wrote in his order, I actually wrote down because I thought it said a lot, and I was happy to see it. And the quote is, there's no more precious and vulnerable resource than children. Thus, the bar to obtain a Tennessee educator's license is extremely high. And I think that should be true. And so given that this was a position of trust as a police officer, I feel bad that he didn't get a whole lot of money. I mean, the crimes he committed, he didn't get rich off of. It was little, small amounts of money, and it was stupid, and I'm sure he regrets it greatly. But I would not be comfortable ruling in any way other than what the ALJ has already ruled. And so I know there needs to be discussion, but at the end of that discussion, I will be making a motion to adopt the ALJ's order.
Any other comments? Daryl?
Thank you. I've struggled with this particular item, recognizing the egregious nature of the initial crime, basically, that Mr. Young committed. But then also reading through what he has done since that time and the work that he's done in schools to present, just made me pause for a second and just think about, the concept of redemption. And, with his sentence and with his, he basically paid his debt to society, and it appears his work to sort of rebuild his reputation and rebuild his character from the egregious mistake that he made. And so, with this, and there's actually another item that we'll discuss later, the most prevailing thought in my mind has been, when you have been punished, at what point is the punishment over? And, I hear and I agree with the idea of being a teacher being a privilege and also being held in high regard with access to children. But I also recognize that we are a nation of second chances in a lot of ways. And to bar someone in perpetuity, to me, just seems a bit aggressive when they've paid their debt to society and are trying to rebuild themselves on the right path. And so I'm still struggling with it in a lot of ways, but I actually admitted to Ms. Kendrick and Ms. Taylor yesterday that sometimes I'm compassionate to a fault. But I just ask that we, each vote our conscience and do what we think is in the best interest of students in education.
Thank you for your comments. I think we've talked about this a number of times. This is probably the most difficult thing that we do with our responsibilities as State Board of Education members. And I hear what you are saying, and I share similar concerns because I do believe in redemption, and I think you're absolutely right. Everyone has to vote their conscience with regard to this, and it is, I feel sympathetic to a fault too at times. Any other comments from any other board member? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move that we adopt the ALJ's order as filed, submitted.
Is there a second? Bob? Any additional discussion? This requires a roll call vote. Casey, please call the roll.
Mr. Baucom. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker. Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Chairman, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Item B, petition for declaratory order.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, my name is Elizabeth Taylor, General Counsel for the State Board of Education. Tennessee Code annotated 4-5-223 permits any affected person that is aggrieved by an agency to petition that agency for a declaratory order as to the validity or applicability of a statute, rule, or order within the primary jurisdiction of the agency. The State Board received a petition for declaratory order petition for declaratory order that challenges a order of revocation that it entered in January 2018. Upon receipt of a petition for declaratory order, the board may vote to convene a contested case hearing on the petition for declaratory order with an ALJ sitting alone on behalf of the board. It may vote to convene a contested case hearing and sit as a quorum of the board in the presence of an administrative law judge, or it can refuse to issue a declaratory order, in which event the petitioner may apply for declaratory judgment in the Chancery Court. The State Board staff recommends that the board vote to convene a contested case hearing with an ALJ sitting alone on this petition for declaratory order.
Any discussion? Any questions, comments? Do we have a motion to approve?
I would move that we convene a contested case hearing in front of the ALJ sitting alone.
Wendy, do we have a second? Bob, any additional discussion? Casey, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Baucom. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker. Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 6, teacher licensure actions. We will, Brittany Kendrick.
Yes, thank you, Madam
Just a
Chair.
reminder, we pulled A, I, and K for a separate discussion.
I believe that is correct. Yes, A, I, and K. Yes, ma'am. So I believe, I don't know how you want to do it, Madam Chair. Do you want to vote on the ones remaining first? And
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have a motion? On all others?
So moved.
Gordon, do we have a second? Any discussion? This is a roll call vote. Yes.
Does the motion need to be to approve the recommendations?
For the,
Yeah.
that the staff
We need
has
to
made,
specify
yes.
the motion.
So it would need to be a motion to approve the recommendation made by the staff on the remaining items not
Yes.
pulled.
Yes. Hayden, do we have a second?
Second.
Gordon, all in favor? Or this is roll call? I apologize. Roll call.
Mr. Paucum. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you.
So the first item pulled was Corey Alexander, denial of reinstatement. Again, this individual was part of the Praxis exam cheating scandal that kind of convened in 2012. His license was revoked in 2013. The staff has recommended that his application for restoration of his license be denied. Basis for that is kind of what you all have discussed here today regarding other matters, holding teachers to the same regard as other professionals. You know, if technically his license, when issued to him, was not a valid license, given that he used invalid Praxis exam scores to get that license. And so that's the basis of trying to just make the education profession one that's similar to other professionals that we see. And so that's the basis for the recommendation. And I can answer any questions that you all may have or just open it up to you all for discussion and vote.
Comments, discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Darrell?
Yeah, I'd asked for this to be pulled just so I could understand. Okay, from your comments just now, it sounds like there's nothing to reinstate, is there?
And so that's my understanding is, and that's what we will have to work out with the Office of Educator Licensing, is my understanding that they will still have to take Praxis exams and get valid scores and get reinstated, but I'm not entirely sure. But in my opinion, the license was never actually valid if it was given based upon some false scores.
Any additional comments? Do we have a motion to accept the recommendation to deny reinstatement of Corey Alexander? Bob, do we have a second?
Second.
Wendy, any discussion? This is a roll call vote. Casey, please call the roll.
Mr. Baucom. Mr. Cobbins. Mr. Darnell. Mr. Eby. Mr. Ferguson. Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Ms. Hargrove.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Item I, Jeremiah Justice.
I pulled this one. So I pulled this, Mr. Justice is, was accused of texting with a young student inappropriately and some other things, and the recommendation, one vote, but am not comfortable with a one-year suspension with boundary training or treatment. And I want to say, this is my home county, so I take all of these as if would I want my child in that classroom, but in this one, it's like a reality check for me. I do have on very good authority, because I am able to check with our superintendent about these things in our county, that this gentleman will never work in Williamson County again. So it's not a risk to my children, but I think he's a risk. And here are the reasons why. He's texting a ninth grader. He's a teacher. He's texting her late at night, early in the morning. He asks her to email him on his personal email and is emailing her on the personal email with emails we've seen that are clearly inappropriate. I mean, they're not as sexual in nature, unfortunately, as a lot of the other cases we get, but they're clearly inappropriate. He buys her gifts, brings her food, has a drawer in his classroom that she could use, doesn't tell his wife, which I felt was kind of telling. He was embarrassed for his wife to hear about it, yet he claimed that it was just him being super friendly with a student. One of the things that really got to me, all of this to me feels like grooming, and maybe it's not, maybe it's just really bad choices, but the decision I have to make as a board member is, do I want to take that risk that it's not, or thinking that it's not, and it is, and that's where my head is. But one of the things that really got to me was that she went to her middle school teacher and told her middle school teacher this was happening, and it was uncomfortable, and it was creepy, and then he looked at her funny in her shorts when she was, at gym class. And for a 13, 14-year-old girl to do that, she certainly felt violated. And the message, I don't want to send her a message that we don't hear her and that her concerns aren't valid. And, even though she's in Williamson County, so she won't have to, I don't want any other girl to feel that way. And so I am going to move to pull this off and recommend a revocation. I mean, I just don't personally think I would ever vote for this man to be a teacher.
Any other comments or questions? Hayden?
Yes. So in the year that I've been on this board, this is a hugely recurring problem of teachers inappropriately messaging students. And at some point, it just has to become common practice of, this is a no, this is where the line's drawn. You cannot personally message students, inappropriately, anything like that, because at some point there has to be a professional line that's crossed, and when you know that you cross that, that's the issue with, there has to be a set consequence. We do revocations all the time for that, and at some point that just has to be the penalty of it. You have to go into that field knowing, I cannot personally text these students because that's unprofessional. That is against, and a lot of times when you get in that situation as a student, that's your superior, the teacher's superior. You don't feel like you can really go to anybody else for help. So lots of these cases like this, I feel like may not ever even be told. Nobody is comfortable enough to tell about their teacher doing that. But so I feel like this happens more often than not, and I have to agree with Wendy. We have to draw that line in the sand and say, this is where this board is going to take that stand. That is inappropriate, that's not professional, and we're not going to allow that in Tennessee, because we talk about wanting high-quality teachers and high-quality students, and for that to happen, there has to be lines drawn, and we have to make decisions of, we're not going to allow this. We want high-quality professional teachers, and in those classrooms, we want our students to feel safe and not feel creeped out. We don't want any type of uncomfortability when you're sitting in that desk and that teacher's telling you about anything. When they're teaching you, you don't want that student to be looking at them thinking, man, are they going to talk to me when I get out of class? You don't want a student feeling like that, because there's always the issue of bullying with students being bullied, and we always try to fight that battle, but we don't fight the battle of a student and a teacher, and that one's much more severe, because that's your teacher. That's the person that you're supposed to be able to go to in that situation, and every time you see them, you get chills going down your back. That cannot happen in this state. If we want our education to go further, and we want those high-quality teachers that we talk about preparing, then we as a board have to say, we're going to prepare you to be the best quality teacher, but if you break these rules, that's it.
Bob?
I don't disagree with anything that's said. I've got a basic due process question. If we take this action, this gentleman, I guess, thinks that he's looking at a suspension.
So
if we take the action that Ms. Tucker's recommending, what is the process for him for appeal or whatever?
So what will happen is, you all are basically voting that you want a harsher action. That won't go into effect today. What will happen is, I will take that action back, let him know that that's what the recommendation, after presenting it to you all today, the board felt like the harsher punishment was appropriate, and that he will have the opportunity to exercise his due process rights and request a hearing if he chooses to do so. So today's vote will not automatically revoke his license. It was just to let him know that that's where the board stands with it.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion?
I would move that we remove item 6I, Jeremiah Justice, from the agenda today for it to be brought back to us with a recommendation for revocation.
Hayden, any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Balkum? Aye. Mr. Cobbins? Aye. Mr. Darnell?
Aye.
Mr. Eby?
Aye.
Mr. Ferguson?
Aye.
Ms. Kim? Ms. Tucker?
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove?
Aye.
Ms. Chairman, the ayes have it.
The ayes have it. Thank you. Item K, Robert McDaniel.
No,
Wendy?
I
Did you
think
bring this one
Daryl.
to us? It was Daryl? Okay.
Yes. I guess following up on the brief discussion from yesterday, the actions by this particular teacher seem to be a bit concerning in that on 3 occasions, he allowed students to leave and they're in a behavior class of some kind. And, you know, a formal reprimand just seemed to be rather light considering that that he was untruthful about the situation and also the potential danger that put those students in on 3 different occasions. And I understand Ms. Kendrick mentioned yesterday the
Well, I misspoke, I think, when we spoke. So looking at, if you placed him in the negligence with harm or potential harm based upon he falls under the emergency rule, and so based upon the rubric, you all could vote to do anything from a suspension of 1 year up to permanent revocation. So your options are a 1-year suspension, 18-month suspension, 2-year suspension, or revocation, et cetera.
No, I was just going to mention that you said that the local district didn't have a lot of investigative.
So they documented it on the video, but there was no other, that was the only basically evidence outside of speaking directly with the director of schools there to get this additional information.
Okay.
So.
I don't have a particular recommendation. It just seemed like a formal reprimand was rather light, so I don't know what the next step would be.
So again, the recommendation could be anywhere, based upon your comments and feeling that it should go into the category of negligence with harm or potential harm to a student. The lowest under our rubric for our emergency rule is a 1-year suspension, and it can go up to a permanent revocation. I don't think that this falls in the lines of revocation or permanent revocation. The district did suspend him for 3 days and reinstated him. And I think when the board staff reviews these, and we're looking at the various different ones that we see on a regular basis, for example, kind of comparing it to the individual with the knife in the kindergarten classroom, which that one was recommended for revocation. So I don't think that he falls in the line of revocation. But I mean, if you all want to do a suspension, that definitely is there. And also, I will point out that our rule also says that even though the rubric says that we can suspend them for 1 year up to permanent revocation, you all have the authority to go outside of that rubric. Given just, I mean, obviously it's you all's decision, but given what we just see on a regular basis, I don't know that 1 year, maybe 6 months or 3 months is appropriate. But again, my recommendation would be to do something in a 3-month or 6-month suspension so that it's clear and understood that this is something the board takes seriously. But obviously, if you all want to go with 1 year, you are definitely within the guidelines of that to do that or more.
Wendy?
Is he currently employed at the school?
Yes, because the final report indicates that he was reinstated, and they told him that if he did it again, that it would be grounds for termination.
So if we did, 3 months, 6 months, would it be retro?
And so that's something to consider too. This happened in February of this year, so we could do a retroactive suspension, which means it would be on his record. He wouldn't actually have to sit out any school time going into the school year, but going forward, he would always have to report that he had a suspension on his record going forward. So we could do a retroactive, from when this happened in February of this year to July of this year of some sort. That's definitely an option.
Okay.
Regardless, I would have to let him know because it's more than what is on the table now, but that's an option that we can do.
Okay, well, I would recommend a retroactive suspension of 3 months. And I'll put that in the form of a motion.
So we have a motion to make a retroactive suspension for 3 months. Do we have a second?
Second.
Wendy, any discussion? Yes, Bob.
Going back to due process, I just want, it seems to me that, I mean, can we vote on this motion as is right now, or would you go back and tell him, and then you're going to bring that back to us?
So I think the proper motion is that you all are moving to pull it for the agenda for me to go notify him that the action that the board wants is a 3-month retroactive suspension as opposed to a formal reprimand.
Yeah, that.
So motion to remove from the calendar and move to the next meeting.
Right.
So moved? by-
With the guideline as stipulated by.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Bob, you made the second? Okay. Roll call?
Mr. Baucom. Aye. Mr. Cobbins. Aye. Mr. Darnell.
Aye.
Mr. Eby. Aye. Mr. Ferguson.
Aye.
Ms. Kim. Ms. Tucker.
Aye.
Ms. Hartgrove.
Aye.
Ms. Chairman, the ayes have it.
Thank you, the
Thank
ayes
you.
have it. Before we adjourn, I have a couple of things to remind everybody of. We do have our upcoming October meeting on October the 19th. We will be meeting on the campus of Tennessee Tech University in beautiful Cookeville, Tennessee, my home. I'm excited about that. And our approved dates for the 2019 board meetings are February the 8th, May the 31st, July the 26th, and November the 15th. We voted on those in our consent agenda. And at this time, I'd like to recognize the members for any closing comments. Yes, Nick.
I would just like to thank everyone for the warm welcome. Being a teacher in the classroom, this is very different from going from following policy to actually making policy. But I really thank the staff for breaking everything down, answering all of my questions, and again, the fellow members for making me feel so welcome. So I look forward to the next few years.
We look forward to working with you. Any other comments? Wendy?
Of course. So I just want to say, Hayden, I'm going to miss you. I know we already said it on the front end, but I want to say it on the back end. And then I don't know how appropriate this is, but I've never been known to be appropriate. This is probably our last meeting with Sarah before she is a mother. So I want to say we'll miss you for a brief period of time as well, Sarah.
Thank you. I won't be gone long, but I will miss you in October, for sure.
Yes, Bob?
Yeah, I too just want to wish Hayden the best. Didn't get to work with you long, but long enough that I nicknamed people, and I nicknamed Hayden E.F. Hutton, because when he spoke, people listened.
Lillian named him Elvis. He bears a slight resemblance to Elvis. And that is a compliment? Young Elvis. Daryl.
Well, I've said what I had to say to Hayden, but in relation to Sarah and her upcoming bundle of joy, and I tell this to everybody I know who's in your situation, that Daryl can be applied to either gender as baby names, so
That is so true.
feel free.
It is a great
Duly
name.
noted. Thanks, Daryl.
I'm so pleased we're ending on some humor, but does anybody else have any comments to make? I do want to say, and I'm trying to lose my voice over here, besides losing my hearing and my eyesight. Just add that to the list. I'm so thankful to all of the hard work of our staff and the department. I think this has been a great meeting, clearly a full agenda, and I hope you all go off and have a wonderful weekend, and thank you so much for all that you do, day in and day out. We are adjourned.